In this video, we'll be discussing absolute value equations and how to solve them. So let's begin. Okay, the absolute value of a number by definition is its distance away from zero and therefore always non-negative. Now that is different from me saying that it's always positive. When I say it's always non-negative, it means it can include the number zero, which is neither positive nor negative. Also, if you take the equation the absolute value of x equals 12, there are always actually going to be two answers for this. Now, if you're thinking absolute value, again, we think about being the distance away from zero. So therefore, we know that x could equal 12, or we know that x could equal negative 12. And the reason is because if you plug negative 12 back into your function, the equation, the absolute value of negative 12 does give you 12, and therefore you actually will have two different answers. Now, if you take the equation, the absolute value of x equals negative 5, there are no answers. And the reason is because the moment you take the absolute value of any type of function or variable, it has to be, like we said, non-negative, which means it has to be either 0 or a positive number. And so therefore, it can never equal negative 5. So the answer to this case would be the phrase, no solution. So let's actually solve an absolute value equation. So here's how we're going to do it. We are actually going to split this equation into two equations. Because if you think about it, you are wanting to know when can this expression give you 17? But because it is an absolute value, technically, if you can make this expression become a negative 17, the moment you take the absolute value of it, it becomes 17. So what you're going to do is you're actually going to create two equations when the inside function or expression can equal 17 and when it can equal a negative 17. Because, again, the moment you take the absolute value of that answer, you will still get 17. So in this case, if we were to solve for x, you're going to add 7 to both sides and get 24. Divide by 2, and you will get 12. That is one solution. The other solution would be, again, if you were to add 7 to both sides. Now, in this case, when you add 7, you actually get negative 10. And then again, to divide by 2, you would actually get negative 5. So therefore, you will have two answers, 12 and negative 5. Now, I'm actually going to stop and we're going to check to make sure that this actually works. So let's substitute 12 back into this equation. It will be 2 times 12 minus 7. And we want to know what that equals. 2 times 12 is 24. 24 minus 7 gives you 17. And the absolute value of 17 is 17. It worked. We know that that answer is correct. Now let's do negative 5. If we were to put or substitute negative 5 into x, 2 times negative 5 is negative 10, and negative 10 minus 7 gives you a negative 17, and the absolute value of negative 17 is, again, 17, so it works. So both those answers actually will work. This is very important in absolute value equations for you to check your answers to make sure that they both do work. Okay, so in this case, we are not going to split the equation quite yet. The idea is you split the equation once you have the absolute value isolated. So before we can mess with this absolute value right here, we need to get rid of the 5 and we need to get rid of the 3. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and first add 5 to both sides. I'll get 3 times the absolute value. Now, last, we do not distribute this 3. Please note, you only distribute numbers when it's in front of parentheses normally. Do not distribute in an absolute value. So this 3 is being multiplied by the absolute value, so therefore we are going to divide both sides by the absolute value. We will get 4w minus 1 equals 5. Now that we have the absolute value isolated, now we can split. So we will have 4w minus 1 equals 5, and then we will have 4w minus 1 equals negative 5. Sorry about that. Okay, now we're going to solve. In this case, in order to solve for w, we would first add 1 to both sides, and we'll get 6, and then we'll divide by 4, and we'll get 6 over 4, or you could say it was 3 halves, or you could say it was 1.5. Either one of those will work. On this case, You would add 1 to both sides, but you would actually get a -4 when you do that in this term, and then divide by 4, and you will get -1 as your answer. So your two answers would be 1.5 and -1. Now in this case, you would plug them back in to make sure they did work. Okay, in this case, again, same thing. You need to solve for the absolute value first. So I'm going to add 10 to both sides. I'll get 4 minus y equals 11. Now that you have the absolute value isolated, we are going to split it. We will have 4 minus y equals 11, and we'll have 4 minus y equals -11. So to solve this equation, 4 is positive, so I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides, and I'll get 7. Now I need to divide by a -1, and I will get -7. In this side, I need to subtract 4, but I'll get -15 when I do that, and then divide by -1, and I will get a positive 15. And again, we can check this out. If we plug 15 back in here, 4 minus 15 is -11. The absolute value of -11 is a positive 11. Minus 10 equals 1. Same thing with -7. If you plug it back in, it will work. Okay, in this case, again, we need to solve for the absolute value. We need to isolate it. So I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides. When I do that, I will get the absolute value equals -1. And I'm actually going to stop here. We have the absolute value of a number, but it's equal to a negative number. Can the absolute value ever equal a negative number? No. The answer is actually no solution. And you're done. Now, what if you didn't think about that part and you actually attempted to try to go ahead and go? So if you were to split it, you would split it as 2x minus 3 equals -1. And then when you split it on the other side and take the opposite value, you would get a positive 1. If you were to solve this, you would get 2x equals 2 and x equals 1. If you plugged 1 back in to check and see if it worked, it will not work. So if you plug in 1, you'll get 2 times 1 is 2. And then 2 minus 3 is -1. The absolute value of -1 is a positive 1, and 1 plus 1 does not give you 0. And I'll show you again. If I plug in 1, if I substitute it in, 2 times 1 is 2, 2 minus 3 is -1. The absolute value of -1 is 1, and 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 cannot equal 0. Same thing would happen over here if you were to solve it. Again, it will not work, and so your answer is automatically no solution.